Welcome to Rooted and Ready from Annie's Project, where we share real conversations about risk, resilience, and the decisions shaping agriculture. I'm your host, Carisha Devlin. I'm a farmer and training and curriculum officer with Annie's Project. In recognition of International Year of the Woman Farmer, today we're highlighting the vital role women play in agriculture worldwide, not only as producers, but as leaders, problem solvers, entrepreneurs, and change makers. Our guest is Dr. Jessica Graves, an educator, a leader, an advocate working at the intersections of faith, agriculture, and women's empowerment. Through her work with M4 Institute, Dr. Graves is helping women in Guatemala and beyond build livelihoods through agriculture. Dr. Graves, welcome to Rooted and Ready.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Before we started, I was telling you how excited I am about our conversation today. I know our listeners are really going to enjoy it as well. So, before we jump in to the long list of questions that I have for you, I just thought it would be fun for our listeners to get an overview about you, a little bit about your background. You grew up on a cow-calf operation in Alabama. How did those roots shape you?
Yeah, I tell students and those that I get the opportunity to work with this often, but first, the women in my life have, especially growing up on a family farm, really played such an intricate part of shaping who I am, not only as a woman in agriculture, but also just equipping me with some of those skills. Like I know that we're going to talk a lot about resilience and being able to have some grit and resilience and overcome circumstances because life happens. We all face really difficult seasons in life, and knowing how to navigate through that with grace and with faith and being able to stand in that firmly is certainly something that I was taught from a very young age. But then beyond that, just shaping my love for agriculture and working in the agricultural community. Again, there's such diversity from
Mm-hmm.
plant production systems to those that are growing small livestock or larger livestock. That just played such an integral part of who I am, and really, I feel like gave me the foundation that I have to be a woman in agriculture today.
So you've had a successful academic career, and along the way, you met some folks from the M4 Institute. Can you tell us what is the M4 Institute, and then what prompted your work with them?
Yeah, sure. Let me give you a little bit of the history here. So, in a previous role that I had with Mississippi State University, I served as undergraduate coordinator, so overseeing advising, academic advising for the Animal and Dairy Sciences Department. And part of that was also student recruitment. So I was out on the road quite a bit. And that's actually where I met the M4 Institute at an eighth grade recruitment event down in Pensacola, Florida. And I used to travel around with this life-size milking cow. Some of our listeners are probably very familiar with what this looks like, but I hauled Maggie around and just to teach students about where milk comes from and what
Mm-hmm.
agriculture is to each of us on a daily basis. And because sometimes those things get overlooked. And so I met Terrell Davis, our executive director, and he does not come from an agricultural background from a professional standpoint. And so he was very curious, and we really just struck up a conversation about international missions. And at that time in my life, I had served in Haiti with Christian Veterinary Mission. So my perspective on international agriculture and like you mentioned, this intersection of where faith and farming and agriculture and all of these things come together. Terrell and I just had a really open conversation about what that could look like. And I felt like God had been really shaping my life at that point to do more work in that space, using my knowledge and skills in agriculture to really serve underserved populations around the world. And so through that one meeting in Pensacola, Florida, a relationship really kind of evolved over the years. I took an exploratory trip down to Guatemala in 2017, and a colleague of mine, we really said, I think this is an opportunity to create an agricultural study abroad program for students at Mississippi State. And so that's really where it started for me in being able to take students abroad who were serving in a community engaged learning course. So empowering our own students to be the trainer, if you will, but there's so many cultural experiences that they were able to have
Mm-hmm.
in Guatemala, building relationships and just experiencing a new culture for the first time that also, is transformational for them as students in an academic journey in a land grant institution. And so over the years, we led the Guatemala Study Abroad program. It still persists today, even though I'm not with the university full time anymore. And so M4 served as my in-country partnering organization. And again, still today, now with my role with M4, I now get to be the partner
Mm-hmm.
and still continue to work with students in that capacity. So it's just been a very fruitful experience. What is M4? We are a Christian nonprofit organization that really is about sharing the love and compassion of Jesus Christ with those around the world. And I often speak to how we are able to leverage individual team members that come and want to serve. Each of us are equipped so uniquely and have different passions and skill sets and gifts. And so every team is different. Every trip is different because we really try to leverage what those individuals bring to the
Mm.
table to serve best the communities where we're working. And so no two trips are anything alike for sure.
In your work internationally, what have you seen women farmers contribute that often goes unseen or undervalued?
We could have a whole podcast episode on this. I think women, there's so many similarities between the what women's roles are here in the US setting with those women that are serving their families around the world. And so I'll just give a couple of examples. One of them being just broadly the dedication that women give to her families. So in Guatemala, I see women who carry a lot of the responsibility in making food decisions. They often are tending to rearing livestock and harvesting animals. They're purchasing food, they're cooking meals, they're trying to get children to school, and as a mom, you can probably relate to this too. As moms around the world, we often carry and shoulder a lot of the household
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities. And so that was probably one of the things that I found just, being able to connect with people despite the language barrier for me in some of the places that I go. People are people, women are women everywhere you go around the world. And I think we are just born with this compassion to care for our families well, and we want to make the best decisions on their behalf. So, a more specific example of how I see this unfold is in Guatemala, tortillas are a staple food item, often consumed at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the process to get tortillas from, dried corn that was harvested in the previous season has been drying for a period of time to get that dried corn into an edible tortilla. There are a lot of steps involved, and often it means that you are working for hours grinding corn, maybe by hand. If not by hand, you may have to walk steep mountains down and up and back again just to go to the mill to have that
Mm-hmm.
corn ground. The financial expense, associated with that is also something that should be considered. And so something as simple as having tortillas to eat with your meal 3 times a day, that it takes a lot of work and dedication. And so that is just I'm always enamored by what women endure to care for their families
Mm,
well, especially from a food perspective. You know,
hmm.
food connects us in so many ways. And so to break bread together and or to share tortillas together, I don't take that lightly because I know and have seen and worked alongside women who pour everything into their families to make sure that they're cared for well. It's a very humbling experience, you know, to just watch the work and the dedication that they pour into serving their families well. And so I always come back with a greater sense of humility and appreciation for what those around the world endure and you know just do on a daily basis to take care of their families.
That, thank you for sharing that example. Yes, I can see where you definitely come back humbled at watching them and all that they do. I will definitely think about that the next time I'm griping about, oh, having to stare at my pantry and figure out what to fix for supper because it definitely puts things into perspective that
Indeed.
yeah, not having to go, I'm not having to make a long trek or to actually grind the corn and so forth. Well, tell us a little bit more about the Guatemala work. For instance, how did the Rabbit Project begin?
Sure. So the Rabbit Project really was officially launched in 2019. And so I mentioned earlier, in 2017, we led the first study abroad program at Mississippi State that really focused on livestock education. So early in my experiences there, I found that with the Ministry of Agriculture, who we have a great relationship with to date, um, I learned that there is often some turnover on an annual basis because of the way the contracts are written there. And when local leadership changes, there can often be turnover within those systems for government employees. So, from an educational standpoint and from a program longevity standpoint, there are some challenges associated with that. So, one of the things that I began to recognize is um, first we could work with the extension agents or the extensionistas there with the Ministry of Agriculture, but due to that turnover, it didn't take me very long at all to recognize that I think it would be better for us just to continue to work directly with the people that need this education, so the families and the households and the communities. And so that began to take shape really a bit more in 2018, but particularly in 2019 when I recognized, along with my colleagues, that there were opportunities for us to focus a bit more on helping families have animal protein available. And so when we look at a food security model, we look at access to food, availability of food, utilization of food, and then the last piece of that is stabilization. And so in order to have a stable and food secure environment, we need to have access, availability, and appropriate utilization of those food sources. So one of the things that we recognize because of the level of poverty in these very rural areas, there is, like, for example, there is beef and pork and chicken and all of these animal proteins available, but that doesn't necessarily mean that families have access, especially when you look at it from a financial perspective. And so my heart really was beginning to question, how can we work with families at the household level? How can we really make sure that these families have access to animal protein sources specifically to help alleviate some of those malnutrition results that we were seeing in the area as a result for children, specifically stunting. And so when the children do not have access to adequate nutrition to help them grow physically or cognitively, there are long-term impacts of that, negative impacts. And so that was really kind of the why, if you will, and how we got started with the Rabbit Project. But rabbits are a small or micro livestock species they're very prolific if,
Hmm.
if they're raised in an environment where their nutritional needs are also being met. And so giving rabbits a place where they can thrive really allows us to um, provide families with household nutrition, animal protein sources. So that was really the starting point, and that began in 2019. The Guatemala Rabbit Project was launched, and I've just continued to be amazed at the ripple effects of that. So we worked in three different communities, provided education and hands-on training, so farm to fork training for 37 women across three different communities. And this also began to be part of my doctoral program.
Hmm.
So for me, it was really mutually beneficial in that I was also able to capture some information that allowed me to earn my doctoral degree as well. But along the way, we're giving students experiences and we're really providing adequate nutrition for households, children that need it desperately. And uh, we were successful in that. So when we look at adoption of that project, of the 37 ladies who were trained, 33 of them adopted the rabbit project, meaning they took the next steps after training to they invested their own resources to build adequate housing so that the rabbits could be kept safely and were able to meet their needs. And after that, because we're a donor supported organization, we have donors that came alongside and said, hey, we would love to be able to help women in these communities have access to rabbits to benefit their families. And so if the women adopted the project, they built and invested their own resources into building that housing structure to meet the basic needs of rabbits. They were then gifted a breeding trio of rabbits, so two females and one male. And again, we had provided them training on how to care for these animals, but it's also very important to continue to follow up and provide technical assistance. And we, as M4, have social integrators, so like our local extension agents that work alongside of our organization in the communities to continue to provide some of that technical expertise and follow up that women need so that they're nurtured. They're there
Hmm.
to help them through the process. It's not just here you go and we walk away. It's
Right.
really about walking alongside of those families and giving them the technical expertise and assistance that they need.
One of the things that really stands out to me when you talk about your work in Guatemala and this rabbit project in particular, you talk about you're giving the women training
Hmm.
and they're responsible for being innovative and creating some kind of structure from their own resources to house this animal. And, they're having resources they can reach out to, but they still have to invest their own time into making this successful. So really your work emphasizes a leg up, not a handout to these women. Why do you think that distinction is important?
Well, I think to a certain degree, it helps instill a level of dignity because we're wired to have value. We each have a certain value, and from a Christian perspective, we believe that God has designed each of us uniquely for His purpose. And so to restore that dignity to someone and give them the equipment that they need, right? To just
Mm-hmm.
empower them to use what God's given them. I You mentioned the innovation. I can tell you story after story and could give you a litany of um, photographs and just the ingenuity that I have seen people of Guatemala and around the world. They're just amazing at coming up with designing these living spaces that maybe don't look like what we would build here in the US, but in some cases are more robust and more well thought out than some of the work that we do. And so just allowing people to, you're planting a seed essentially and allowing that to be nurtured and empowering people to use the brain and the creativity that God's given them is really important. Nobody wants to just be handed something. We want to be able to shine for ourselves. And so that really is one of the approaches that we feel strongly about in because then you have someone in the community as a champion and their neighbors look to them as as leaders, and that's how this innovation and adoption process often spreads, is that neighbors are on looking in the neighboring community, and they'll say, hey, how can I get involved in that? And so that also gives individuals and families a sense of kind of pride in a way, that their neighbors feel strongly and are looking positively on the projects that they're doing and see their success and that they want to be part of that too. And that is very encouraging for in boosting the morale of families and communities and even individuals. And so we want to be able to empower them through that leg up so that they can use what God's already given them.
Speaking of empowering, what makes agriculture such an effective tool to empower women?
Oh, well, I have to be honest, I'm completely biased in this, but I think that agriculture is just unique in that it connects us in so many different ways. And so we're empowering women through agricultural activities and projects to care for their family. So there's the food piece of this. When we think about empowering women from like an agricultural education perspective, you're giving knowledge and you're sharing something with someone that nobody else can take away from them. Knowledge, we often speak of this, but knowledge is something that no one else can take away from you. And that in and of itself is very empowering. But to be able to present ideas and again, I just mentioned it, but like planting these seeds of opportunity, it I believe is really important to helping empower people to use what God's already given them. But and my students and those around me will hear me say this often, but you don't know what you don't know. And so if you've never been exposed to certain ideas or concepts, sometimes you just need a little bit of encouragement and just an idea to help spark that next level of innovation. And agriculture does that in so many different ways. We could look at it from, like a technology perspective. We could look at it from growing food and feeding our families. We could look at it from an entrepreneurship perspective, byproduct use and utilization. I think about the rabbits as using the pelt of that animal because our priority is to use it for food, but one of the byproducts of growing um, rabbits specifically is that they have a pelt that can then be utilized for crafts like making little change purses or you could put a few together and make a small blanket. I mean, there's just so many things that you can
Hmm.
do. And so helping people recognize other uses of this creation again from that God's given us to to benefit them both from a food perspective, but also from a financial perspective, and so there's economic empowerment through that as well.
When you talk about the byproducts, that's really also teaching the women how to be entrepreneurial.
Hmm.
Can you speak to some other enterprises that they may be involved in and other ways that they've learned to use byproducts or um, worked with
Sure.
what they've had?
Yeah, sure. I'll give a couple of examples, and the first relates to beef cattle. So early in the work that we started doing in Guatemala, working alongside meat market owners and learning about the beef harvest process from an educational standpoint. We were taking students and helping them understand in this farm to fork setting how beef gets from the farm to the table. And often our students, especially those in animal and dairy sciences, they had seen the beef harvest process and how we do it in the U.S., but it looks a little bit different because of the space that this happens at the abattoir, the tools that are available to be used in a different setting. And so it's really an opportunity for training our students. But I remember, and this is kind of funny, but I love beef jerky. I travel with beef jerky oftentimes, and so I thought, man, this is a great opportunity to teach the meat market owners and expose them to beef jerky. And I
Hmm.
remember the very first trip we took 17 students to Guatemala, and I promise you, we had 17 different varieties of beef jerky,
I'm
flavors,
sure.
textures. And we met with about 20 of the local meat market owners and those that were working in the abattoirs. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, this is going to be great. We're going to save the world through beef jerky. And it could not have gone more wrong. So we allowed for taste testing of the beef jerky. And again, understanding the culture and the cultural norms is so important when you work across cultures. And so for me, I thought this is great. This is the shelf life of beef jerky
Hmm.
allows them to, as a meat market owner, to be able to utilize some of those cuts of beef that may have, been hanging for longer periods of time. We can upcycle these and get some value added products. And those meat market owners absolutely hated the texture, the flavors, everything. And I thought, oh
Okay.
my goodness, I have totally failed. So fast forward about 5 years, one of the younger meat market owners, who's a great friend of mine now, he and his friend came to us and said, "Hey, will you teach us how to make this? How to make beef jerky?" And at that point, I thought, "This is great. Like we're back on track."
Hmm.
So I guess I tell you this story to say, sometimes we have ideas and we plant those seeds and ideas of opportunities, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be accepted, and that's okay. Because I think the timing, is important. We have to work with people and in the cultures in a respective way. And so, just in the last few years, we've actually done some food preservation training. So, both with beef products, drying beef. We will buy beef in the local market on Sundays when we arrive, and we'll go through a drying process and share that with children in the areas, with the meat market owners, with the Central de Salud workers, those that are really working in the communities.
Hmm.
And that has been very well received. Still some work to be done in that area, but when you look at helping um, individuals, whether they're raising plants for food, so I think about some of the unique things that are grown there in Guatemala, like one thing called whiskey. In some seasons it's abundant, and when it's abundant, often it's supply and demand. The price of that they can get in market is lower, and so we've started trying to just plant these ideas of um, dehydrating those products that you have when they're in abundance, and being able to use that in a later season when they're not available. Another example is working with some of the sheep owners. So, in this particular area where we work, there are lots of individuals who used to be involved with wool craftsmanship. So, making blankets, making things like beanies or rugs, just wool products. And that art has continued to just go by the wayside, similarly to what you might would see here in the US. It takes a lot of work and dedication. You work with your hands. It's time consuming. It's not easy. It's hot. And so we see the young people that are not continuing these family legacies of working with wool products. And so
Hmm.
despite that, we've started trying to, um, uh, again, plant seeds of opportunity for individuals and families that are raising sheep and helping them recognize the opportunity to, when they shear those sheep, how to care for the wool, the fiber that's being produced, how to really take care of that in a great way to improve the quality of the wool, but also taking it a step further to work with them and say, hey, look, you have opportunities to create additional income by spinning this wool or preparing it as yarn. And so, again, just trying to help some of those livestock owners recognize the opportunity to keep some of or increase the value of what they're already doing, so in a way that it benefits their families. And so that's just a couple of examples of uh, working with the meat market owners from a beef perspective, or working with sheep owners, and of course rabbits. I used to carry around a little pair of baby booties that my students made that were lined with a rabbit pelt, and the women in Guatemala absolutely they love that. And so there's every every trip is different. Every group brings something different to the table, and so we try to just kind of keep a Rolodex of these opportunities of what the communities, the people in the
Hmm.
communities are telling us they want to learn how to do. Um, so I know there's a school that I really need to get back to with some sixth and seventh grade girls who are interested in learning how to sew and utilize those rabbit pelts. And so that would be something I'd love to do in the near future with a team who is interested in teaching sewing and those kinds of crafts for the young girls in the area.
I love that your work is education based. And it reminds me of a conversation I had many years ago at a conference. I met a gentleman, he was from Africa, and we were talking about just women in agriculture and educational program. And he said, when you educate a man, you educate an individual. When you
Mm.
educate a woman, you educate a community. And that quote has always stuck with me. Why do you feel education is such a powerful catalyst for women?
Well, I think that quote said it perfectly. Women often, I think we're social, we're probably more social creatures than men in many cases anyway. But, I think there's just something to say about like sisterhoods and the community. We often lean into those around us for advice. We lean into those for accountability and just to be in community with one another. And again, from a Christian perspective, I believe that's how God designed us, is to be in community with one another. And so when you provide education to women, and I've seen this in different African countries. I've seen it in Guatemala, and I see it here, even amongst my own students and teams that I get to work
Hmm.
with, is equipping women by way of education, especially agricultural education. You're giving them something first that no one else can take away. But the nature of women to work with one another and just to be like, think about the social groups, whether you're getting together to play bingo or play mahjong or whatever the thing may be these days, um, there is an exchange of knowledge that often happens in
Hmm.
those types of settings, even if it has nothing to do with in a formal educational setting. The exchange of knowledge that happens so that women help one another is just so powerful. And I kind of get emotional thinking about it because that's what it's about. It's about lifting each other up and empowering. our sisters, but also being an example to those younger women. So just like those teenage girls that I get to work with in schools, they look to us as a role model
Mm-hmm.
of an inspiration. And I think that is a responsibility as women in agriculture that we should not take lightly because we have that responsibility. But it's a gift. We have a gift of sharing that knowledge that we have with others so that, again, from a food security standpoint, that our generations are food secure and stable, and just quite frankly, women hold families together like glue oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we can equip them through education, especially agricultural education, that, man, that's just powerful moving forward.
It is powerful. And it also reminds me of another quote that goes, I'm loosely paraphrasing it, but like, too much is giving, much is expected. For those of
Hmm.
us that do have that knowledge, those resources, that ability to share with others in agriculture, I really commend you for the work you do to help empower and educate women, not only in our own country but across the world. Can you share a story of a woman whose life changed through one of these programs? And I'm sure you have many, many that you could share, but is there one that really stands out to you?
Yeah, there is one that really stands out, and this was from 2019 when we launched the Rabbit Project in Guatemala, to into 2021. So this one particular individual, she is what did a great job of raising rabbits. And there's kind of two parts to the story. So first, we all probably remember very vividly the year of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 2019, we had this cohort of women across three different communities who had been trained in rabbit production. They had been gifted rabbits and were, in the fold of raising rabbits for meat consumption and also to generate income at the household level. And this one particular individual, she had been ill for quite some time, but unable to afford the medicine that she needed because just the level of poverty that exists in some of these rural communities. And through 2020, there were curfews in place for, people were not able to travel to market in Guatemala. I mean, just remember how it was here in the US, and really multiply that by 10 or 100.
Mm-hmm.
The ripple effects of COVID and how that impacted individuals and families and communities. I think honestly, we're still probably feeling some of the impacts of that today, but this particular individual was very successful at raising rabbits, and in 2020 and then in 2021, she reported back to us that because of the Rabbit Project, she was able to afford the medicine that she
Oh,
needed,
wow.
and was able to sell rabbits, and of course had them to feed her grandchildren
Mm-hmm.
lived in the home with her. And so there were just like multiple levels of benefits from something so simple as raising a few rabbits. And that story has really just kind of stuck with me because this same individual had a reputation in the community of being successful at raising rabbits. And actually, I was there in 2021, and someone had just recently come through in the night and stolen all of her rabbits. And
Oh,
so
no.
yeah, just you just think about resilience. She did not let that get her down. She had plans and had saved some money at that point and was ready to buy rabbits again and continue the rabbit project. And
Mm-hmm.
so you see again just the empowerment. It allows, sometimes seeing is believing. And so for me, being able to see this one individual be able to take care of herself better through traditional medicines and having access to that, because of the income she was able to generate is just one example of the benefits. And I have a whole portfolio of stories that I could sit and tell you about, those, even from a spiritual perspective to just a like physical
Hmm.
perspective of being able to feed their families. Like it's just amazing to see how God has allowed us to work in this space with women. So yeah, I'm grateful for what I get to do for sure.
What have women farmers, particularly in Guatemala, since a lot of our conversation has been focused around that country, what have they taught you about resilience?
Well, when I think about, just to give you some imagery, when I think about resilience, oftentimes the flower that is growing on the side of a mountain, is the image that comes to my mind,
Mm-hmm.
despite just kind of being at this point of, you would think there's no way out. There's no way that someone can overcome this. They do. And so just the level of determination coupled with faith, oftentimes, just continuing to trust um, that God's there and He's given us opportunities to just keep walking forward, and having that faith is important. But the women, you don't have time to let things get you down. I don't know about you, but for me, we all face challenging seasons, and some days are easier than others. And I think especially in the agricultural community, we are built with some level of resilience. When I think about farmers and ranchers in our country, and how their stories and experiences parallel some of the women farmers and farmers in general that I have encountered around the
Mm-hmm.
world, there's just this level of resilience that the agricultural community exudes that the whole world could take note of. I mean, you just you have this perseverance to, again, care for your family and to feed your family. You can't wait on the next person just to give you something. You have to be able to stand in the gap and do what you can with what you have. And that looks different for every family, for every community, every people group around the world. But I just am always at awe at the level of resilience that especially the Guatemalan women, the daily hardships, just like the example of the tortillas, just the daily things that they have to do in order to live life and feed their families.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't think anything about it. It's just what you do. And just to, boil a pot of water, you don't just run in and turn the stovetop on. You have to start a fire and make sure that it's hot enough to
Mm-hmm.
boil water. Those are the types of things that I get to see, and again, just stand in awe emotionally oftentimes because they do so much.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really very moving. It makes me feel emotional just hearing you talk about it. What a great opportunity it is for the students that you're bringing to these different countries for them to witness that as well. So I love that you've really done the work in helping students have these international experiences on top of the work that you're doing within those countries for women. I've had the opportunity to travel, and one of the things that's always stuck out to me when I have is that at our core, we're all the same. We're all very much alike at our core. What common threads do you see among women in agriculture, wherever they might be?
Well, you've just hit the nail on the head, and I mentioned this earlier. People are people, no matter where you are in the world. We all crave, we have certain basic needs, but I think we crave community. And I think about some of the things that happen in our culture that are in some ways very isolating. I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to communicate digitally and kind of behind. I just use social media as an example, but you can kind of hide behind reality
Mm-hmm.
through through social media. And I don't think that that's how we were created. I mentioned earlier just this design for relationship. And so, to exchange a smile, I can tell you that I am so moved when I get to travel the world and I don't speak the language. I mean, not, even in Guatemala, I understand a lot of Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish
Mm-hmm.
fluently. And despite those lack of communication skills, verbal communication skills, a person's body language and a smile goes so far. And to me, I think just being able to recognize and literally sit with women and say, I understand where you're coming from. Like I love my children and I want to care for my children. So I
Mm-hmm.
think as women, and particularly as women in agriculture, again, we shoulder a lot of responsibility. And I don't say this in a way to bash our male counterparts, but women do have, we're just created so uniquely to care for one another.
Mm-hmm.
We care for our sisters, we care for our mothers, we care for those in our community in ways that I just think is so unique to how we are designed. And so when you get to, especially when I look at, like the women in agriculture in the US, that is a very, very small population of individuals. But yet there's this thing that connects us all. And I have said recently, I truly believe that agriculture is a fabric that connects all of us,
Mm.
whether it's for food production or whether it's for a sense of community. Um, women do that. They connect around the world. And so it's probably one of my greatest joys to see and sit with women and just see the authentic smiles. Like it's almost like this joy and happiness that they can put their barriers down and to break some of those like cultural taboos in some cases of just being to connecting with women around the world is truly probably one of the greatest joys that I have in getting to do what I do.
And thinking about U.S. women in agriculture, what can we learn from other women farmers around the globe?
Well, if, I think we can certainly take away a level of resilience. I think the agricultural community in the US demonstrates already a certain level of resilience. But when you take a step back and really look at it from a global perspective and the women in agriculture on a global scale, oftentimes, they don't have access to the same things. There's a gender gap,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, but for education. Many cultures, the boy children are prioritized for education, and so girls often don't have the same opportunities, even for education. And you think about access to some of the inputs. There are, in some cases, again, gender gaps between what women have access to for fertilizer and seed inputs and all of the things associated with the basics of what you would need to um, be a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
Access to land. Sometimes it's, the women do a majority of the work and don't actually get to reap the benefits of that financial income that is an outcome of that work that she's done. And so uh, I think women are probably pretty creative. I have had some conversations in Uganda with some women about like how they trade and barter with each other. And so I love seeing just the creativity of women farmers around the world. Again, and I think it speaks to the persistence and determination that they have, just this level of grit care for their families, to take care of themselves, to take care of their community, despite some of the hardships and challenges that they face. And so, really, there's just, again, a lengthy list of some of those attributes that I see in women farmers around the world, um, from grit and determination to compassion and practicing stewardship and faith on a daily basis. I think there's just so much that we can gain from being with them.
I've been so inspired by our conversation today. I really want to say, sign me up for your next trip.
Yeah.
If we have a listener out there that's having that same reaction and wanted to engage in this kind of work, where would you tell them to begin?
Well, I am certainly happy to be your resource in that regard. So we do host teams. So with M4, and I have partnerships with others, and beyond Guatemala. If that's something that you really feel like you're being stirred to do, please reach out. I mean, I've mentioned this a few times, but women brings there this level of sisterhood that is often created with individuals who come together to serve together who do not know each other. Like I'm usually the common thread of a team,
Hmm.
and so for me to get to see individuals just bond, whether it's students or ag teachers or whoever it may be, it is so fun to see people come together to serve alongside of each other in other communities, and then to see them connect with the individuals in these communities to share what knowledge and skills that they have. So that anyone can reach out to me via email. I'm happy to share my phone number as well if someone's interested in putting a team together or jumping on maybe an existing team that we have. We can be flexible. So just reach out. I'm happy to have those discussions.
Dr. Graves, thank you for sharing your work. Again, I'm in awe of it, just so inspired by hearing about all the great things that you've been involved in, that M4 Institute has been doing. You've really changed the trajectory of so many people's lives. And then also anybody that they're in contact, because as you've shared, the women also often inspire each other or mentor each other. And that is that well, here's where I fumble over my words right at the end. I don't I don't have words for how great that is. I think that is truly the best example of how to empower and support each other as women in agriculture. You also have reminded us that agriculture can be a tool, not only for production, but for opportunity and hope. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Rooted and Ready from Annie's Project. If this conversation encouraged and motivated you, subscribe and share it with someone else in agriculture. Until next time, stay rooted and ready.